All right, how about now? There we go. Good deal. Well, good morning. It is good to be with you. I am glad to have the opportunity to get to come and to be with you guys again. I think this is my third time getting to come and be with you guys. And it's always a good opportunity, and I'm always glad to help out Josh because he's helped me out so much, so greatly. I owe him a very high debt of gratitude. What we're going to talk about this morning, I want to talk about the faith of Abraham. This was a study that I've done a few times before. I find it very interesting. The hard part about looking at Abraham in the Bible is condensing all of his stuff down to a very short time. The material on Abraham is a great abundance, but there's a few things that I want us to look at in particular. The first thing I want us to do is to establish the importance of Abraham. That's not going to be a hard thing for us to do. We all understand how important he was to God and his service and what he has done ultimately for us as well. The next thing I want us to look at is Abraham's moments of weakness. While he was important, he did have some moments of weakness, or he fell short at times. And lastly, I want to talk about Abraham's actions of faith, what he did and what we can draw from that. So, the way I like to do my class, I need a lot of help. I got to have a lot of comments and a lot of help because I struggle on my own. So, here's what you should know. When it gets really quiet and it gets awkward and I'm kind of looking around, that's your time to know, oh, I should probably be saying something, or oh, I'm up. So, what I want to do this morning, if you could, I need 3 readers right off the bat. I need someone to read me Isaiah 41 and verse 8. Who can do that for me? Isaiah 41 and verse 8. All right, he's going to Isaiah 41 and verse 8. I need somebody to go to James 2 and verse 23. A volunteer for that. And then I need somebody to go to 2 Chronicles chapter 20 and verse 7, if you can find that. Yep, Isaiah 41 and verse 8.
But thou, Israel, art my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the seed of Abraham, my friend.
Okay, that's God talking there in Isaiah 41 and verse 8. All right, did I get a James 2 and verse 23? I've got it. Here we go. And the scripture was fulfilled, which saith, Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him righteousness. He was called the friend of God. And then 2 Chronicles 20 and verse 7.
Art not thou our God, who didst drive out the inhabitants of this land before thy people Israel, and madest it to thy seed of Abraham thy friend forever?
Okay. There's 3 verses we looked at there. I notice on all 3 of those verses one thing in common when referred to Abraham. What was it? God's friend. Isaiah 41, the seed of Abraham, my friend. James 2 and 23, he was called the friend of God. And then 2 Chronicles 20 and verse 7, Abraham, thy friend forever. There is no denying Abraham's importance. God called him his own friend. Can you imagine how that would make you feel, that God call you his friend? Abraham has great importance. I think another verse is Romans 4 and verse 11. Listen to this. And he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of righteousness of the faith, which he had yet been uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all them that believe. That is a very high, that might be God calling you your friend. It might even be a greater honor to be the father of all them that believe. Abraham had high importance. There's some religions that you'll see that even take Abraham and want to put him on a higher stage than other people. Some people worship Abraham. That's not what we're needing to do, and that's not what we're going to try to do. That's dangerous. But Abraham was of great importance. But what makes me feel good, and what's a good thing for us to take from this, Abraham was called God's friend. He was called the father of all those that believe, but he also had some times where he didn't do exactly what he should have. So that's what I want to do now. Let's go and look at some of Abraham's moments of weakness. The first moment of weakness that comes from Abraham comes from Genesis chapter 12. Genesis 12, and we will start there in verse 10. A little context before we get into this. Well, I'll just read it, and the context kind of explains itself. Verse 10, and there was a famine in the land, and Abraham went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. So there's a famine that where he's at, it's pushing him on to somewhere else. He's going to Egypt. And it came to pass, when he come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarah his wife, Behold now, I know thou art a fair woman to look upon. It seems that Sarah was a pretty and attractive woman. Verse 12, Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. Verse 13, Say, I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. So, Abraham, they are traveling, going to Egypt, and he has his wife Sarah. She seems to be a very fair woman. What is Abraham worried about when he rolls up to Egypt? Yeah, he's worried that they're going to see Sarah and be like, man, I would like one of the kings or someone of a high authority in Egypt will see her. I would like to take her for my wife. The only thing in between me and her is Abraham. Here's an easy fix. I'll kill him, then I can have her. So he told his wife Sarah, just act like you're my sister, and then we won't have to worry about it. I'll be safe. We won't have to worry about anybody wanting to kill me so they can have you. I find this incredibly interesting because God calls Abraham in the first few parts of this chapter. He calls him out and says, you need to go. You're going to go on. And then just the time that lapsed from the call to this moment of weakness, I don't know, not very long, and he is worried about his life. It shows the human side of Abraham. What I find even more interesting, he did this once in Egypt, but he also did it in Gerar as well. It is in Genesis chapter 20. We're not going to look at this account, but the same thing happens this time. They roll up. It's King Abimelech this time, though. He rolls up. He's worried about him, so he tells Sarah once again, tell them that you are my sister. I don't want King Abimelech to kill me. He is prioritizing his self-preservation over his integrity. To me, that kind of shows a lacking of God's promise, a little bit of weakness. The second moment of weakness I want us to look at when talking about Abraham comes from Genesis chapter 15, and he's doubting God's promise of a son. Genesis chapter 15, we will look at just a few verses here. After these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abraham in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abraham, I am thy shield and thy exceedingly great reward. And Abraham said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless, and the steward of my house is this Eliezer of Damascus? And Abraham said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born of my house is mine heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, This shall not be thine heir, but he that shall come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir. And he brought him forth abroad, and said, Look now toward heaven, and tell the stars if thou be able to number them. And he said unto them, So shall thy seed be. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. So this is a interesting part here, something that we can take for us. Abraham expressed doubt in these first few verses here. He was very doubtful of God's promise. He was of old age, we know. His wife, barren never was able to have a kid. Whatever her circumstance was, something was not right. The womb, she was never able to conceive, and he was expressing a little bit of doubt. For me and you, I think an important lesson for us to take, it is okay to express doubt or to express questions. But notice what Abraham does. He expresses questions. He asks God. He shows him his doubts. And God gives him an answer, and look what Abraham does in verse 6. And he believed in the Lord. It's 100% okay for us to have doubts or to have questions, but we've got to look to God's word to answer those doubts and questions. And we've got to be willing, like Abraham was, to take those answers and be like, you're right, I believe that, and I will follow through with that. Now, sometimes, and a lot of people, they like to question God's word, but they don't go to God's word for answers. I've got a problem with that. If you're going to question God, you've got to go to his text and to think and to look at it, because he has answered it for us. And that's what happened here with Abraham. A moment of weakness, but he took God's answer for what it was. From Genesis 15 to when the promise took place, that was a 25-year gap here. So it's interesting to see this fold out. After he has this doubt, 25 years later until the promise is fulfilled. Another moment of weakness for Abraham is he agrees to have a child through Hagar. We're staying here in Genesis chapter 16, and look at a few verses here. Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, bare him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said unto Abraham, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abraham hearkened to the voice of Sarah. And Sarah, Abraham's wife, took Hagar her maid, the Egyptian, after Abraham had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband, and Abraham to be his wife. And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she was conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. Now, here's you a little Bible trivia. The child of Abraham and Hagar's name was Ishmael. Yep. And Sarah, doubting a little bit of God's promise, comes to Abraham. Now, you could say that this is Sarah's moment of weakness, which it was a moment of weakness for Sarah. But she comes to Abraham, and Abraham could have easily been like, look, God, just keep your faith, Sarah. God's got us. We don't have to do this. But he was obviously doubting as well, because when she presents this idea to him, he said, okay, let's take it into our own hands. This is what I like to refer to as a human solution to a divine promise or a divine problem. Boy, do we like to do that sometimes. We like to have these divine problems, and we like to take our human solutions and try to fix them. We see that happen we could sit here all morning and name all the times that has happened. When people try to take God's plan into their own hands, and we see what happens here. This is not what God was wanting. He was lacking trust in God's timing. But God, we're talking about 25 years. And I think from this point to when they decide to have the child through Hagar, I want to say that was maybe 8 years from the promise of when God said it to when they waited. So waiting 8 years is a long time, but ultimately they had to wait 25. But Sarah and Abraham, they take it into their own hands. A moment of weakness for sure, and a lack of trust in God's timing. The moment of weakness number 4, he pleads for Ishmael instead of trusting God's plan. This is in Genesis chapter 17. This is a interesting account here as well. Genesis 17 and verse 17 and 18. Genesis 17, verses 17 and 18. Then Abraham fell upon his face and laughed and said in his heart, Shall child be born unto him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear? And Abraham said unto God, Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. Abraham, once again, is having some doubt. He is at this point 100 years old, and his wife, Sarah, 90 years old. Not only is nature against them here, remember, Sarah was never able to conceive a child, even in her prime years, from 20 to whatever you want to say it. She was never able to do that. So Abraham says, look, here's an idea. We have Ishmael, instead of having to have this promise and for Sarah to be able to bear a child and to go through that problem, let's just take Ishmael and we'll put him in the position of the child that we're supposed to have. This is another example of trying to take a human solution to a divine problem. The recommending to God the actions that he needs to take, that doesn't work out very good sometimes. And that is what has happened here. He was doubting God's miraculous plan, and he was leaning to more practical solution. I believe putting Ishmael in instead of having Sarah and Abraham, he 100, her 90, never able to have a child, is that more practical just to use Ishmael? It'd make a lot more sense. He's already born. It's already happened. He's already here. Let's just put him in place and we'll just move on from that. So for us, a world sense, it makes sense. That's a practical solution. But when it comes to God, that's not the case. But came to him again, doubted him, had a little bit of weakness, but he continued with him. I think that's a lesson we have to continue to think about and to continue to lean on. When it comes to a moment of weakness, when it comes to a moment of doubt, he asked God, he took God's answer, and he put faith in that and followed on through that. That's something we have to take and we have to use. Okay, that is the moments of weakness. Any questions or comments on those 4 instances?
Let's go back to the first one, where you said that you wanted her to be his sister. Did they put him to death? Is that why he thought that they would put him to death at that time? Was that a custom?
Yeah, I don't know. I would say at this time, with the high authority of the kings of Egypt, whatever they wanted, they got. And I would assume that he was worried that they would, if they wanted Sarah and they were looking for a wife and she showed up, that would be what, if they wanted it, they would got it. And they would have took him away and killed him, and that would have left Sarah no other chance. That's what she would have done, to go and to be their wives. So I would say probably was a custom. I'm sure that's happened. I don't know. I don't really have any Bible for you for that, but you can look at these old historical accounts, and there was no doubt that what they wanted, they got. I mean, they were the kings of this time, so I would say yes on that.
No, Sarah had to be weak too.
Yes.
Because she was influencing wives and
Oh, yes.
down there.
Perfect timing. Perfect timing.
But, wives influence husbands a lot of times in their decisions.
Yes. So when Sarah's idea to have a child through Hagar, Abraham didn't hold up his deal. Abraham should have said, no, let's trust in God's plan. Sarah is guilty in this instance because Abraham comes at this point and he tells her the plan. She should have said, no, if God's going to send us on this journey, then surely to goodness he's going to protect us. But she was a little weak there as well, so that's a good point. Yes.
One of the things we can learn from all of these things, what Abraham failed to do or did wrong, and his wife Sarah, when we think there's no answer or no solution, God can always provide a way. And it takes our trust and our faith in Him, even to the end. And if we'll be faithful, He's going to give us that kind of life. And there's always a way with God, whether we see no way out of something.
Yes.
He can always provide a way.
Yes, absolutely. I've used this illustration before. And imagine if we are living in our house and in our backyard, we have this shovel, and every time we make a mistake or every time we make a sin, we go out there and we take that shovel and we start digging. Well, if you're anything like me, after a long time or after a little while, that hole would get to be tremendously big, and you would be way down off in there. But once you're down off in that hole and there's no way you can climb out, God always gives you a rope. Now, that rope is not good for anything if you don't grab a hold of it and let Him pull you out of that hole. You can keep digging and He'll keep extending the rope, but if you're not willing to turn around and grab the rope and say, okay, I'll do what I need to do, get me out of this hole, and I'll quit digging it, then God's not going to do that. But if you're willing, then yeah, there is a way out. So that's what, for Abraham, at any point Abraham could have been like, let's just go back home where it all makes sense. We don't have to do this. We don't have to go through these things. I don't have to worry about my life with the people of Egypt. I don't have to worry about King Ablamelech killing me or taking my life. I don't have to worry about, can you imagine if someone of our time today, we have a couple, take me and Anna for example. We lived, I'm 100, she's 90. Anna was never able to have kids. And I come in here this morning and I tell you that God's promised me and Anna a child. And you've known us for our whole lives. You've known that Anna, we've never been able to have children. You know I'm 100 years old. So you're sitting there and thinking about that. You would think I'm crazy, wouldn't you? You would think I am absolutely nuts. We would go around and tell people. You can imagine what people would, sometimes, and this might be me when I leave today, I might leave and you guys might be like, that Zack, he's just a little bit weird. That would be exactly what happened to Abraham and Sarah. They are a little bit weird. They think God has something. They think that God is going to give Abraham a child. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So you can imagine and we don't even have that recorded, but those conversations had to happen because they had to talk about what they were doing and why they were out and about and what this whole plan was. So people were doubting them and causing these issues, but they carried on. Okay. Anything else before we get into his actions of faith? All right. I have 3 actions of faith. I call them actions because I believe, personally, the best definition for faith is actions you take based on what you believe. There is a worldly faith that people think I can climb up on this stage and I can trust fall and that something's going to catch me. Or you see the faith of running and jumping off a cliff and something's going to catch me. That is not God's faith. God's faith is, okay, I understand his Bible. I understand what I need to do. Now, because I believe that, what am I going to do following? Abraham is a great example of that. His first action, let's go to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11, and we will start there in verse 8. By faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out not knowing where he was going. Cliff Goodman, he's a good preacher, does a lot of work for the GBN, and I've listened to a lot of his stuff. And I was listening to one of his sermons the other day, and he said this about faith. Faith has to know something, but it doesn't have to know everything. And that has changed the way I think for a little bit. I've been thinking about this a lot. Faith has to know something, but it does not have to know everything. Did Abraham know everything about what was going on when he got into this event? No. There was a lot that he didn't know. Do we know everything about what's going on? No. You've heard we've said these things before, and we mean it. When I get to heaven, the first thing I'm going to ask is this, or the first thing I want to ask is that. There's some questions that we have that are just simply not answered. Now, do we have the important stuff? Absolutely. We have what we need, but there's some things from our studies that we would be curious to know the answers to. Abraham is the same way here. Faith has to know something. I believe we're more blessed than Abraham because I believe we know a lot more than what Abraham did. Abraham had no idea. But faith has to know something, but it doesn't have to know everything. And that's what, when God called Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, he didn't know everything. Now, we can take it from this side and look at it. I believe why God pulled Abraham out of the situation that he was in. At this time, Abraham was living in his father's house. Anybody know his father's name? His name is Terah. Abraham's father's name was Terah. Now, if you'll do a study of Joshua 24, and we don't have the time to do it today, but you'll see in Joshua 24 that Abraham's father's house, Terah, they worshipped and served many different gods. Now, when I say gods there, I'm talking about the little g gods. It was maybe the gods of the sun or the gods of the air or whatever you want to call them. Anything that you would present to them, they would worship them. A very big custom at this time. So, we have Abraham's father. The house that he's living in is full of idol worship. Do you think that would make sense if Abraham's going to come out and, like Romans 4 says, be the father of the faithful, that God would have to get him out of that situation, wouldn't he? Because if you try to leave Abraham there, and we know what would happen, and we can see this in our New Testament too. They try to get these Judaizers to come out of this, and you can see constantly that they would get these new Christians, and then where would they want to go right back to? They'd go back to the old text. They'd go back to Judaism. They'd go back to what they know. They would come out of it for a little bit and go back. This would be the exact problem I think that would happen here. Abraham would learn a little bit, and then he'd go back to the idol worship. Learn a little bit, and then go back. So I believe that's why God called him out. But Abraham has no idea why God called him out. He just knows God said go, I believe, so he took off. So I believe that is, he didn't know everything, but he knew something. And I think that's the context of ultimately why God called him out, to get him out of the idol worship that his father's house presented. Hebrews 11, verses 9 and 10. Are any questions on that? The Joshua 24 and Terah. That's an interesting study. I would challenge you to go on to read that, and I think you'll get the same impression that I do. Yes. Because that would be, instead of dealing directly to Abraham, he would go to Terah, and then Terah would pass it down to Abraham. So he had to be called out to make this plan work. Good point. Okay. Hebrews 11 and verse 9. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. We are, in a few weeks, this week, we're going to take off. We're going to go to Branson for a week, for a few days with my family. And then with Anna's family, we're going to go to the beach for a week. I really enjoy going on a vacation and getting to see these things and to do these things. But if you're anything like me, let's see, today's Sunday, next Saturday we're leaving to the beach. So somewhere around Thursday of that next week, I'm going to be like, okay, the beach was fun, Branson was fun, but I'm ready to be back home. I'm ready to be in my own bed. I'm ready to be at my own place. If you're anything like me, that's what's going to happen. It might not even be Thursday. It might be Wednesday. The sand and the beach, after I get rolled up on it, after I boogie board for a while, and I'm out there laying like a well, beached out of water, and I get sunburnt, sand's everywhere, I get a little bit tired of being gone from home. I'm a homebody. I like to be home. These men here, they don't even have a home. They're just living in tents, traveling around. For me, that would be terrible. Not having a stationary place, a place that you can go to every day, where you can have a routine, and to follow that routine, you do the same things constantly. For me, that's a great benefit. For these guys, they're just running around in tents. God says to go here, so they go there. God says now go over here, so they travel over there, set up their tents in all these places, kind of just walking around until God gives them this city whose maker and foundations is God. So they're just out traveling. They don't know where they're going, but they stuck to the course and they followed God. Hebrews 11 and 12 here. Through faith, also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed and was delivered to a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore sprang from even of one, of him as good as dead, so many as the stars of the sky in multitude, and the sand which is by the seashore innumerable. You mentioned about the importance of the wife for this. If Sarah was not bought into this plan, it would never work. It took a great effort for both of them to make this happen. And notice there, Sarah, she was received through strength to conceive. She judged him faithful who had promised. We know she laughed at him a few times, but ultimately she took his plan and followed it and carried over. In the verse 12, him as good as dead. So Abraham is called out. He doesn't know where he's going. He's traveling around waiting for this city. And this leads us into action number 2 from Abraham and Sarah. He says there in Hebrews 11, he is good as dead. I want to emphasize on that next. Let's go to Romans chapter 4. What does it mean when he's good as dead? Romans chapter 4, and we'll be looking at verse 17. As it is written, I have made thee a father of many nations, before him who he believed, even God who quickened the dead, and calleth those which were not to be as though they were, who against hope believed in hope. I think that is such an interesting verse. Against hope, he believed in hope. We talked about Abraham and Sarah's situation. Him 100, her 90, her never able to conceive a child. That's against hope. There is not much hope there. But against hope, or against nature, or against reality, they believed in hope. They placed their faith in God, and he delivered them a child. That child's name was Isaac, right? Yeah. So against hope, they believed in hope, and we see Isaac was born of them. The last action, I know we're running short on time, so we'll kind of talk about action 2 quite a bit. This last action that I want us to talk about comes from James chapter 2, and I want to look at this and study this because I think it's of great importance here. James chapter 2, and we'll start in verse 21. We know that Isaac has been born. They waited 25 years for this promise. We know their age. We know Sarah's situation. Isaac here is in the prime of his life. He is in his teenage years, maybe not quite teenage years, but he is starting to come alive, develop his personality. He is really starting to come to be his own person. You, as parents, can recognize this when your kid's starting to get older, kind of starting to be their own self. It's probably an exciting time. Anna's, her baby's due in October, and I am so anxious to see that and to see what that looks like. But we have, and me and Anna didn't have to go through what Abraham and Sarah had to go through, but they have this child that they've waited for 25 years. Against hope, they believed in hope. You can imagine all these struggles and strains that had on Abraham and Sarah's marriage when they could not have children for 70 years after they have come together. You can imagine what that would cause to them. So they have all these tough times. They stay faithful to each other and to God. And they have this son, Isaac. He's in the prime of his life. And then look at what God tells him to do. Looking there in verse 21. Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he had offered Isaac his son upon the altar? Seeing now how faith wrought with his works, and by works was faith made perfect. And the scripture was fulfilled, which saith, Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. Now, we know this account. God tells Abraham, I need you to sacrifice your son Isaac. Yeah, the same son that they waited all this time for. The same son that is in the prime of his life. He's starting to bloom into his own human. God tells him, I need you to take him up on the mountain and sacrifice him. Now, people believe that this journey was probably 2 to 3 miles up this mountain to get there. So we have a long hike, and we know that Abraham and Isaac are walking together. This says, we mentioned Sarah as the wife. This kind of mentions the son's faith too a little bit. Because you can imagine if you were a 12 to 16-year-old child, you would be strong enough to probably, if your father was going to take you and sacrifice you, and you weren't just really thrilled about it, I believe I'd probably be strong enough to at least put up a fight, right? You could at least, his dad's 100, at this time his dad's 110, 115. I would take my chances before I let somebody sacrifice me if I didn't understand God's plan. But obviously Isaac did, because he goes along with the plan. They take him up on the mountain, If I was in Abraham's mind, I would probably be thinking, okay, we made this journey. I showed that I was going to be willing to do this. You don't have to really make me sacrifice him. I've showed my point. I've showed my faith. This might be something that Abraham's going through Abraham's mind. He gets up there and he puts them up and he's ready to sacrifice them, and Abraham might be saying, okay, or this would be me if I was Abraham. Okay, God, I made this long journey. I put him up on the altar. I'm going to sacrifice him. That should show enough. But it wasn't. What was enough, and this is how it reads, Abraham had took the knife and he had pulled it back and was about to stab Isaac, and God stops his hand right on the way to it. So he almost let him go all the way through it. Now, I believe, and this is at this time, let's think about this, and this is I think, even adds a greater value. At this time, had God ever risen anybody from the dead? No. If this happened in the New Testament, it would still be a crazy act of faith, but it would make a little sense, right? Because we've seen Jesus be rose from the dead. We've seen Jesus raise Lazarus and heal all these people. So it would make a little bit more sense. This example was set. Abraham had never seen or heard of anybody being raised from the dead. But I believe his thought process was, I'm going to kill my son Isaac, and God is going to raise him from the dead and bring him back. Now, God didn't make him go all the way to that point, because God knew exactly what Abraham was thinking. Didn't make him kill him, but he stopped his hand on the way to. That is such a important lesson for us to take. Any questions or comments on any of that? Thank you. That is a lot to think about. There's a lot of good conclusions that we can draw from that. We can be imperfect and still be considered faithful to God, I believe, is an important lesson. God's time's not always our time. How true is that? Boy, we don't like to wait. But God doesn't. I always like to say God don't really understand time sometimes. He makes us wait. Number 3, when God says something, you can count on it. And number 4, if we're faithful to the end, we will be rewarded. And that's what we've seen with Abraham. Any closing comments or remarks? I appreciate your attention, and I hope that benefited you. And we'll see you in the worship hour. Maybe that'll work as well. If you change your mind, you've got a few minutes to leave before I preach again. So, thank you.